Hey there and welcome back to the channel. In this video, we are going to look at 5 exorcism cases from Ireland, which were included in the book, The Dark Sacrament, which we review in detail later in the video. For our first story, we travel to County Limerick in the year 2010, where we meet the Callahan family who moved to County Limerick, hoping for a fresh start. Instead, they were thrust into a nightmare. Their 6-year-old daughter, Sarah, was the target of terrifying attacks. She told her parents that something was whispering to her at night and pulling her hair. Scratches began to appear on her back, and she refused to sleep in her own room. Doors slammed without cause, and the family heard faint laughter coming from empty rooms. Shadowy figures began appearing in the hallway, and Sarah became withdrawn, refusing to speak to anyone. Desperate, the Callahans sought help from their parish priest, who performed a house blessing, but the activity only intensified. The church approved an exorcism, and a team of priests arrived to cleanse the home. As the prayers began, the air grew heavy, and the room filled with an unearthly wail. Lights flickered, and furniture toppled over as though pushed by invisible hands. After hours of relentless prayer, the activity ceased. The family moved out soon after, too shaken to remain in the house. In 1972, Margaret McGinn, her husband John, and their 2 small children settled into what they believed to be their ideal house in County Antrim, rural Northern Ireland. Though everything appeared idyllic, that quiet dream quickly descended into a nightmare. When it first started, it was just little things. Doors would close by themselves, odd drafts would sweep through enclosed rooms, and whispers would float about the house throughout the evening. Margaret at first wrote off these incidents as part and parcel of owning an old house, and the excessive imaginations of her children adjusting to new surroundings. But it soon became abundantly evident that something substantially more nefarious was involved. The disruptions became more horrific as the weeks went by. Things moved on their own. Steps echoed from deserted hallways, and then the physical assaults started. One night as she lay in bed, Margaret felt an extreme pressure pressing down on her. She could not yell for help or even move. All she could do was just pray. The McGinn family was caught in an apparently only worsening nightmare. Margaret, desperate for help, asked her local priest, Father John, for assistance. Father John agreed to bless the house, hoping that this would be sufficient to drive away whatever sinister entity had set its sights on the family. The house grew quieter and calmer as Father John passed room to room, sprinkling holy water and chanting prayers. The McGinn family momentarily thought they were free. Unfortunately, the tranquility did not endure. Not too long after the house blessing, the dark force returned with a fury. Margaret became its main objective. At night, cold hands swept against hers. Whispers permeated her ears. Shadows seemed to creep around the home from every angle. The once gentle disturbances had become full-scale assaults. The youngsters started to have terrible dreams and were awoken to find shadow men at the foot of their beds. Now in desperation, Margaret once again turned to Father John for help. Father John understood that what he was dealing with was something far more deadly than your typical haunting. Father John contacted his bishop for permission to carry out the rite of exorcism, which was granted. When the time to perform the Dark Sacrament arrived, Father John and 2 other priests went to the house. As the prayers began, the room in which they were performing the exorcism became charged with a strong, repressive force. What was clear was this demon was not going to go away easily. Furniture shook, lights flashed, and anxiety filled the chamber. Margaret cried out in pain as the demonic power seemed to oppose the efforts of the clergy. The priests prayed relentless for hours on end, until at last the house went quiet. The ominous presence vanquished. The McGinn family was at last free, but the event would always leave permanent scars. Next, we come to the story of Thomas Rafferty. In 1994, rural Irish farmer Thomas Rafferty led a quiet existence in County Mayo, in the west of Ireland, until a particularly sour argument with a neighbor took a dark turn. Following the argument, Thomas observed his crops withering, his animals becoming ill, and other strange streaks of bad luck. When he started hearing weird whispers at night and seeing black figures out of the corner of his eye, the matter got more serious. Thomas became convinced he was the victim of a curse placed on him by his neighbor. Desperate, Thomas turned to his local priest, Father Michael. When Father Michael visited the property, he noticed right away something was off. A sense of a dark presence hung in the air, and the shadows appeared unusually lifelike and possessed of a will of their own. Sprinkling holy water and chanting prayers, he blessed Thomas and Thomas's fields and house. The disruption stopped for a period. But shortly thereafter, the demons returned with a fury. Furniture moved on its own, animals died inexplicably, and Thomas started having terrible nightmares. The priest increased his efforts and carried out multiple blessings over the property and Thomas. He also called in other clergy to assist him in this difficult spiritual battle. At last, following weeks of non-stop prayer and exorcism rites, the demonic energy started to dissipate. Thomas never forgot the strength of faith in overcoming the demonic curse. Our next story, set in 1988, called The Possession of Bridget, concerns a young woman who was attempting to live her own dream life in another peaceful community in County Cork. The whispers and shadows vanished, Thomas's cattle healed, and his crops started to bloom once more. Bridget had grown up in a hostile, violent home and carried the scars of her past into adulthood. But it was these very scars that had allowed something darker to take hold of her, and unfortunately, to accompany her in her attempts to escape her troubled past. The demonic entity first showed itself as mood swings, anxiety attacks, and odd mental whispering. These events caused young Bridget to become depressed, and Bridget started to understand that she might be carrying something more sinister than just mental illness. However, soon, what began as an inner struggle quickly turned into outside tragedy. Bridget's actions become increasingly troubling over time. She would fly into explosive outbursts of rage, with voices emanating from her that could not possibly have originated in her. Her strength was inhuman, and her body twisted and contorted in ways that would have broken bones. She would scream at her family, toss furniture across the room, and use profanities in languages she had never studied. Frightened and perplexed, her family sought medical help. Therapists, doctors, and psychiatrists tried to assist, but to no avail, as nothing they tried could explain Bridget's unusual behaviors, knowledge of things unknown, unnatural strength, and violent outbursts. Her family, in a last measure of desperation, sought help from the church. Their local parish priest, Father Simon, agreed to meet Bridget. What he discovered validated their worst fears. This was not a mental disorder, but a spiritual disorder, something demonic. As the meeting with Bridget progressed, Bridget, without warning, started calling out the sins and fears of Father Simon in a voice that was not her own. Father Simon quickly understood at that point he was dealing with a possession. Similar to Father John before him, Father Simon also sought the permission of the church to perform an exorcism. Father Simon arrived at Bridget's house with his 2 clerical assistants. Bridget's body seized abruptly as soon as the ritual began. Her voice roared profanities, deep and terrible. Around the room, objects rattled, and a stifling sense of dread permeated the room. Bridget battled resolutely for her soul, refusing to allow the foul demon to deter them. Father Simon and his priestly assistants carried on praying. Screaming in several voices, Bridget strained against her bonds, yet again disclosing unspoken truths about the priests present that no human could know. Her body twisted, her voice changed from one personality to another, and the air itself seemed infused with evil. Bridget let out a last terrible scream during one of the many sessions of intensive prayer. The foul creature had been expelled. Bridget's body went slack, the ritual successfully completed. The struggle for the very essence of Bridget's soul was over, and she was finally free. From their experiences with the supernatural, Bridget and the McGinn family suffered lifelong wounds. Though the terrible and possessive grasp their life had been under was gone, the memories of the horror would linger always. These stories, recorded in the book The Dark Sacrament, serve as a reminder to all of us that whilst darkness can infest our lives, God will always reign triumphant, and evil will never be victorious. Now we move to County Kilkenny, where devout Catholic Grace Donovan lived. In 2002, Grace Donovan moved into a charming cottage near Kilkenny City, excited to start fresh after a difficult divorce. But almost immediately, strange things began to happen. The sound of soft footsteps echoed through the hallways at night, and her bedroom would become icy cold without explanation. Then, one morning, she woke to find scratches on her arms and legs and bruises on her face, as though someone, or something, had attacked her while she slept. Shadowy shapes loomed at the margins of her sight, and the house's atmosphere thickened with anxiety. Terrified, Grace sought help from her parish priest, Father O'Connell. He visited the home and performed a blessing, but the activity only escalated. Grace began experiencing vivid nightmares of being suffocated by a shadowy figure. The scratches became deeper and more frequent. At her wit's end, Grace begged Father O'Connell to return, and he contacted the bishop for approval to perform an exorcism. When the ritual began, the house erupted with violent energy. Furniture shook, doors slammed, and Grace herself cried out in agony, claiming she could feel hands pressing against her throat. Father O'Connell and his team of priests prayed for hours until finally, the darkness seemed to lift. Grace never experienced another attack, but she moved out soon after, unable to stay in a house where she had been tormented so deeply. Now, as promised, here is my review of the book. These sample of cases came from The Dark Sacrament. There are many, many more horrifying stories of Irish possession and exorcism in the book. David M. Keeley and Christina McKenna have put together a fascinating collection of real-life cases of exorcisms and otherworldly experiences in contemporary Ireland. In The Dark Sacrament, the writers deftly combine captivating tales of hauntings, possessions, and spiritual conflicts to transport readers into the fervent and usually terrible and terrifying experiences of those who had to undergo these spiritual battles. For anyone interested in the paranormal and the reality of spiritual warfare, this book, whilst an intriguing and terrifying read, also for me was ultimately full of hope, and had the glory of God and his victory over evil shining throughout. The Dark Sacrament distinguishes itself by its polite and respectful attitude to the subject rather than the over-the-top schlock we are used to when dealing with this topic. The writers highlight the real hardships and emotional toll these events had on the victims, as well as the clergy who performed deliverance. Personal testimony combined with spiritual background produces gripping stories where the power of God through religion and ritual takes the stage. Readers who appreciate provocative, spine-tingling stories rooted in real-life spiritual encounters would find great value in this book. Thanks for watching, and we appreciate you traveling with us into the horrific realm of actual exorcisms and hauntings. Remember to like, subscribe, press the notification bell to stay updated with all of our video releases. If you liked this video, you may want to check out some of our other videos, such as Ireland's most terrifying poltergeist. If you would like to give additional support to the channel, we will leave our Patreon link in the video description. If you decide to become a paid Patreon member, you would also get access to our TV and movie reactions, which include X-Movie, The Cube, Wolf Creek, Band of Brothers, as well as many more. And if that wasn't enough, 50% of all Patreon proceeds will go to charities, such as the St. Vincent de Paul Society, the Capuchin Day Center, and aid to the church in need, and receipts for all donations will be posted to Patreon. Until next time, God bless you.